Hey everyone, welcome back to the Caderna podcast. I'm your host, Brian Caderna. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about your brain and how to take care of it. It's certainly not something most of us wake up and think about, as we take for granted our most complex and incredible organ. So in today's episode, I'm going to speak with Dr. Mark Williams, an internationally recognized professor of cognitive neuroscience, on how to maintain a healthy brain. He has been at the cutting edge of developing computational brain imaging analysis and virtual reality in research. Having worked at MIT and taught at other notable universities, today Mark joins us by way of Australia to discuss neuroplasticity and how to get the most out of your brain. He has a new book titled The Connected Species: How Understanding the Evolution of Our Brain Can Change the World, which will be coming out in August of this year. This episode is brought to you by Weekly Wealthy Wisdom. Join the thousands who have already subscribed to my weekly newsletter and receive insights on my latest findings for leading a healthy and wealthy life. Emailed right to you for free every Monday, head on over to www.briancaderna.com and click subscribe to Weekly Wealthy Wisdom. Now, without further ado, here's Dr. Mark Williams.
Is going to require work and time and sweat and toil.
If money wasn't an issue, what would I be doing?
Don't worry about it. You'll figure it out.
Change is the only constant.
The Caderna Podcast.
Mark, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited because I think this is pretty fascinating stuff. And so are you done with the book? Or are you just kind of waiting for all the marketing and publishing, or there's still some final touches on that?
Yeah, no, the Gaily proofs went back about 2 weeks ago. So, and that's it. Yeah, for me. So yeah,
Nice.
Now I just get a big list from the media guys about what I got to do after once it's actually published. Yeah, few book launches and so on. So it's a fun time at the moment. All the hard work's done.
Yeah, congratulations. I know I
Thank
just
you.
came out with a book a few months ago, and I know it's a long journey to do so.
Yeah, it sure is. It's my first venture into a general interest audience too. So it's been interesting trying to change the way I write. Spent
Yeah.
25 years working out how to write as an academic, and now I've got to try and write so that everybody can understand it and get away from that academic writing style.
Yeah. Did you find that difficult to kind of translate from, the science, the scientific world, if you will, to, just speaking to the general audience out there of how all this is applicable to them?
Yes and no. It was more of a bit of a journey, I suppose. But I've always been really keen on being accessible to the general audience. My background's very much, I come from a very small country town, and none of my family went to university before me. So I've always been keen on that. And I also had two great mentors, especially Nancy Camwisher at MIT, who was all about getting science out into the general public. So it was. I had to get rid of the academic speak out of it, but I don't think I had a huge. Yeah, I really enjoyed it, to be honest. I did really enjoy it, and there's a lot of personal stuff in there as well. So it was a lot of fun to get that stuff out too.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And just to kind of tee things off here, can you tell us a little bit about your personal history? Like, did you know when you got into medicine that neuroscience is, what you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, great question. Well, I didn't actually do my I actually hated school when I was at school, and I thought I was quite dumb, to be honest. So even going to university wasn't something that I had ever thought of doing when I was younger. Grew up in a country town, which was pretty rough, and my mother had mental illness, and my father was a workaholic to sort of avoid all of that. So it wasn't until I was 25 that I went back to school and went to what would be community college in the US, and we call it over here, we call it TAFE. And there was a physics teacher there that saw something in me I'd never seen before, and convinced me to go to university. I wasn't even going to go to university then. So I went to university, started doing both physiology in medicine and psychology in science. and fell in love with the physiology side of things, fell in love with the neuroscience side of things, which was very early on in those days. So it was a lot of animal research and not so much human research. And so luckily I was sort of at the first wave of that neuroscience in humans, the cognitive neuroscience. And yeah, really fell in love with it at that stage. But no, it wasn't something I ever had on my radar until probably third year at university. And then I got into a really good program, which had just started, and that was on, it was neurology basically, but it was focusing on neuroimaging and single cell recordings, like combining the two, which is really cool. And then I went on and did a PhD in medicine, and yeah, got into MIT, which was amazing. Started working there, which was really cool. And then that was the end of it, right? I was obsessed by it.
That is pretty cool. And so, a question I have for you, I'm a big fan of philosophy, and you hear so much nowadays about like mental health. It's especially here in the States, that's become kind of like a buzzword. So, with all the research and with your whole career, I mean, what can you say to that of what I often talk about? The choice to be happy, that it's a decision to take that positive outlook and make any experience, what you think of it. Are people just, is there a natural wiring in our brain where we could have, more of a disposition to that outlook versus a negative outlook? Or where does like the biology actually start to kind of play into that?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. And yeah, it's quite a complex answer, to be honest. There's lots of different ways you can look at it. One of them is neuroplasticity, which is a fairly recent discovery in relation to the idea that our brains are plastic throughout our lives. So it keeps changing, and our IQ and all the wiring keeps changing throughout our lives. So we can change our brains even into our 70s and 80s based on what we do and what we don't do. And so the term use it or lose it not only works for your muscles, but also works for your brain. So the areas of your brain that you're using and that you're activating a lot become stronger, and the areas that you're not using become weaker and slowly atrophy. So if you're constantly happy and in happy situations, you're more likely to see happiness around you. And so therefore those neurons which activate those centers of your brain which are involved in making you happy or making you content are more likely to activate. So therefore they'll be more likely to activate even in situations which might not be as pleasant. So that's a really important thing to remember, is you've got to put yourself in situations which are going to make you happy, so that you're constantly wiring your brain up to be happy, to activate those areas so that they'll continue to activate when it's a little bit more stressful than it would be otherwise. The other thing is that we are wired up to socialize, and our brains automatically, so most of what we do is habitual. You probably talked about this before, but we think about somewhere between 40 and 70% of what we do every day is habitual. So we do it automatically. We don't think about it. And the reason we do it automatically is that our working memory, the area of our brain which is involved in what we're consciously aware of and what we're thinking about at any one time, is really limited. And it's limited to like what we call 7 slots. And those 7 slots mean that you can only hold 5 or 6 things in your working memory at any one time, and then you need a couple more to actually work on those, to actually think about things or to do things and so on. That means that most of what we do and most of what we perceive is automatic. So perceiving facial expressions is automatic, perceiving body language is automatic, and all of those things we do automatically through what we call a mirror neuron system. So we automatically activate areas of our brain which are motor areas, which are associated with what you're actually seeing. So if someone smiles at you, then the area of your brain associated with smiling activates. The muscles associated with smiling activate to a sub-level. And so therefore you feel the way they feel. You feel happy and you understand that they're happy, which means, of course, it's contagious. So if you're around people who are smiling all the time, then you're happier than if you're around people who are sad all the time. If you're around people who are sad all the time, you're going to be sadder because of that. So surrounding yourself with people who have positive demeanor, And also surrounding yourself with people who are always happy is actually going to make you happier, even if you don't want to be. So that's another important aspect to it. So, as a leader, having people around you who are always positive is going to make you more positive just through that mirroring effect that actually happens. And that's automatic, and we can't actually do anything about it. So it's really important to do that, because if you're surrounded by negative people, you're going to be more negative because of that automatic mirroring.
Yeah. That's interesting. So it's kind of like that snowball effect where, you start to get a little happy, then you get much more happier, and on and on. So some of that momentum there. What's it kind of in the same vein, you hear so much, and again, I'm at least speaking from, and maybe this is an international issue. I know it is here, at least in America, but antidepressants are more than common. They seem almost like they're everywhere now. For so many folks, it just seems natural, that would be a solution to just kind of getting into a rut. What are maybe some of your comments on that? Like, what exactly is that doing to the brain? Is it good or is it bad, or is it neither? Is it just a temporary thing? How does that kind of play into this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's not great. Like the evidence shows that the more you use those medications, then the more likely you're going to need to use those medications. So you do get hooked on those medications. The other problem is that we don't really understand how they work very well. And what they're basically doing is just dampening down all of your emotions. So you don't feel as happy either. So you lose your happiness as well as you losing the sadness that you're getting. So therefore,
Really?
you're not as motivated overall, and you're not constantly using that happiness, and so therefore that happiness area also atrophies, as does the sadness area. So you sort of become in the middle all the time, rather than having any sort of opportunities to be really happy, which personally I'd rather be really happy occasionally than to dampen that down. The other, what we've got to realize is that we are social animals. So we're as a course, a connected species. And so our brain has actually evolved over millions of years. And we have a really large brain so that we can actually connect, so that we can spend time with each other, and so that we can actually understand each other. But socializing is complicated. And so you need a really, really big, large brain to actually do it. And that's why we have a large brain. And actually socializing activates more of our brains than anything else we do. And it actually makes us happier than anything else we can do. So actually sitting down and talking to someone you trust, is actually better for your mental health than any drug we have these days. So that's actually a better way of treating things like, depression or anxiety or stress than any drug we have. So we need to actually spend more time with each other. We need to spend more time face to face in real life, actually talking to each other, and touching each other, because you touching appropriately, of course, but touch actually activates a whole bunch of areas of your brain that you don't get when you're online like we are at the moment, and also releases oxytocin, which is really important, both from a mental health point of view, but also for connecting and actually trusting someone. So spending time with people, and actually, being intimate with people, not as in sexually intimate, just actually trusting them, being vulnerable with them, talking to them about your problems, is actually a better way of handling mental health issues that aren't at the clinical level, that aren't at the severe level where you need to be hospitalized, is better than any drug we've got out there. And that's what we should be really focusing on. And that's what, that's why I talk about, keeping our brains healthy rather than mental health issues, because once you get to those significant issues, then we've got an issue, and we don't really have any way of getting back from that. So we really want to keep our brains healthy by spending more time with each other.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love that. And I share a similar sentiment. I feel like there should be almost like you need to exhaust every possible outlet before it comes to medication. At least that's, and I'm no expert in this, but in kind of like in line with that, do you find, I know you mentioned that being with one another, talking with one another is a huge cure of sorts. What about exercise, meditation, yoga, music, video games? I mean, can you kind of point to maybe, is there something that it's like, hey, this is, if you had to do one thing, maybe this is what you should give a try to?
Yeah, if you got to do one thing, it'd be spending time with somebody else you trust and actually talking to them. That activates more of our brain and is better for our brains than anything else we can do. Then you've also got exercise is really good, because then you get other neurotransmitters released after you do exercise. So that's also a really positive thing. But you don't have to go out and run a marathon, or you don't have to be able to sprint or do things like that. Just going for a walk for 30 minutes each day is actually really positive impact on your brain and on your body as well. So, just getting up and walking. So it doesn't matter how fit you are, you can actually do that. And of course, you can combine the two. So go for a walk with someone that you like and chat to them as you're walking along. You get the double whammy of both having the exercise and having the socialization. So that, to me, I think is better than anything else we actually have.
Got it.
Out there. Yeah, definitely.
And I want to get into, the book and some of your research in a moment, but just to piggyback on that. So we have going for a walk with someone that you know and trust, that you can talk with. And then another thing we all love to do is maybe do both of those with a cup of coffee in our hand.
Yeah.
Now, if I could ask, where does that fit into the mix? Is that introducing a stimulant / drug through caffeine, or is that still kind of fair play, that we're not doing anything habit forming, or some of what you alluded to earlier?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a great lover of coffee, and I probably drink
Okay.
too much coffee. So I'm not going to criticize anybody who drinks coffee. And I love coffee. Most of the research, well, all the research now is suggesting that having a varied diet and having varied what you actually put in your mouth is actually the best way and is the healthiest way to actually live. So the more variable your diet and the more different things that you're actually consuming is the best thing. So having coffee occasionally, or having coffee once a day or whatever, is okay, as long as you're having lots of other things as well and you're not just drinking coffee rather than anything else. But what we got to remember about the brain is that anything that affects the brain, like caffeine or drugs or alcohol and so on, is that it's basically there's chemicals in whatever it happens to be that you're taking that feed into receptors in the brain, which actually usually would have accepted neurotransmitters. And so what it's doing is just an artificial way of activating the brain. So from that point of view, it's quite natural drinking coffee or anything else that we're actually doing. What we've got to control is not doing too much of it. So things like drugs and so on work because there's a lot more of that chemical than what is in the normally in your brain. Whereas when you're drinking coffee, it's not much more than what is actually in your brain anyway. So it's not going to have a huge impact unless you're doing it constantly, or if you're drinking some of those drinks that have huge amounts of caffeine that are well above what you would have in tea or coffee. And so yeah, having just coffee is not a problem. What I would suggest is probably avoiding anything that has a large amount of caffeine in it, such as some of the drinks that are now out there, which would have a really negative effect on your brain.
Got it. Interesting. So, Mark, I know you talk a lot about in your new book, some of your research on how important it is for organizations to create a healthy brain and focus on their environment and culture and how the two play together. Can you just share a little bit of your insights on that?
Yeah, I think it's something that organizations are becoming much more aware of. But I think that it doesn't matter what area you're working in, the most important asset that you have is your brain and the brains of your employees or the brains of the people you're working with, because that's what, innovation, creativity, but just work gets done because brains are working well. And so we need to be more aware of how we can keep them healthy, and how we do that is giving them a rest at times. You look at the Formula One teams around the world; they don't thrash those cars 24 hours a day. They test them and they train with them. But when they're not doing that, of course, they actually look after them. And so we need to do that with our brains as well. We need to have time out. And one of the biggest problems, I think, in a lot of organizations and with a lot of people at the moment is that we're all really, really busy, but we're less productive now than we've ever been. And so we need to think about that and stop being busy and start being productive. one way to do that is to give time out. And so a lot of organizations around the world now, and in fact, some countries now in Europe are banning companies from emailing their staff after hours. So having times when staff get emails, and then having times when they can actually log off and spend time away from their emails is a really positive way of doing that, and has been shown to actually increase productivity during the working hours, and gives these employees this time to reset and their brains to reset. So saying, within your organization, we're only going to email each other between these hours, and then after that, you're not allowed to check your email, and you're not allowed to email anyone else, and I'm not going to email anyone else. It's really important, of course, for the leader or the CEO or the board of directors to do it as well, because if they're not doing it, then of course everyone else thinks that they should be doing it as well. So doing something like that is really important. Also, batching emails. So actually only having emails going to staff and having all of the organization's emails only coming out, say, 2 times or 3 times a day has also been shown to increase or improve mental health. So mental health is really negatively affected when you're getting emails all the time because you're constantly stressed. Another thing which we talked about earlier is, of course, your working memory, that area of your brain which is actually involved in your consciousness and what you're actually doing, is really limited. And so you can't actually multitask. What we're doing, our brains are incapable of multitasking. What we're doing is switching from one task to another when we're trying to do multiple things at a time. So every time your phone dings, or every time you switch and look at your Teams group, or every time you look at a website rather than doing what you're actually doing, that involves you task switching. And every time you task switch, every time your attention gets caught by something else, you lose the last 90 seconds of what you were doing. So every time you get a ding on your phone, or every time a little thing comes up on your screen as a 1 or a 2 on your email or on your social media or on your Teams or whatever you're using, that means you're losing the last 90 seconds of your work or what you were thinking about, which is really bad for productivity. But it also is really draining on your attentional network. And so that causes a lot of stress as well. So decreasing all those distractions is really important as well. So having time where people can actually concentrate, can actually think about one thing at a time, and not being distracted by all those other things is really important as well. And we know that just having a phone beside you turned off decreases your intelligence and decreases your working memory capacity. So having employees put their phones away or lock them away somewhere while they're actually trying to work on something, or while they're trying to concentrate, is going to increase their working memory capacity, their intelligence, and their mental health. So those are a few little tips. Another one is using Pomodoro technique, which is all over the internet these days. But it's basically you set a timer and you concentrate on one thing for 25 minutes. And during that time, you only do one thing and you get rid of all your other distractions. And you have the timer so you can actually see it. And after the 25 minutes, when the beeper goes off, you stand up and you just move around for 5 minutes. And then you go back to that task for another 25 minutes. If you do that, they recommend you do it 4 times, and that's 2 hours of really concentrated work, and you actually feel really good afterwards because you've actually achieved something for the day. And then after that 2 hours, then you have a longer break where you can do other things, such as check your email or check your Teams or check Google or whatever you want to do. It's been shown to be the most productive way to actually spend your day, and it really is awesome. I do that for 2 hours every morning, and I get more done during that time than I do during the rest of my day.
Yeah, I'd believe it, because I mean, I'm a victim of the emails like so many other people are, and it's crazy because I mean, when you do have those 2 hours where you just feel like you're in the zone, you're just checking off one thing after the next, or you're writing, or you're doing your best work. It's such a great feeling. And then conversely, it's the worst thing in the world when it's like 2 hours go by and you look back, or you tell someone what you did and you almost can't even name it. It's like, I don't know what I did. It just kind of time passed by. But question absolutely. I have on the emails, some people might say, hey, if I've got a packed day, I'm a business owner. I've got a thousand different things I'm dealing with. If I say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to answer my emails for another 2 hours, and then I'll go take a peek. And then when they do, they're just absolutely flooded with emails that they have to catch up on. Do you find that it's almost like rather than just kind of this lingering stress, now they almost just have maybe none for a while, but then this huge spike of like, how am I ever gonna, overcome this?
But yeah, I get what you mean. But I find that when I'm working with people, there is that to begin with. Like they're all, and they're actually anxious even when they're not checking their emails, because they're like,
Sure.
emails are building up, and it's something that you've already established in your brain. We were talking about that before, that your brain changes, and so we've got these really strong connections saying, I got to check my email, I got to check my email, because you used to do that all the time. But once you get rid of that, once you've done it for a week or two, you during that 2 hours that you're not doing it, you actually forget about it completely. And as you said, you get into this really good zone where you're actually concentrating. And then when you get back to your emails, it's almost like you don't want to be there, and you just want to get through them. And so you tend to I do anyway, tend to get through my emails quicker, because I'm just dealing with them. Whereas a lot of people, I think, will look at emails and not deal with them straight away, and then have the stress of, I've got to go back to that email, and have this huge, long list of emails that they've read but not dealt with.
Yeah.
Whereas I think once you get into that zone where you're like, I've got these 2 hours, and now I've only got 20 minutes where I've got to get through my emails, you tend to just deal with them, get them out of the way, and move on, rather than on this slow thing where you're dealing with one every 5 minutes or whatever, and not actually dealing with them properly, or you might be dealing with them properly, but you're not getting anything done, and so you're more stressed. So I've found, everyone I've worked with has found it stressful to begin with, and more stressful to begin with. But then after a week or two, and it's just like, I've been on a roller coaster. It's like, whoa, this is so much fun, because I'm getting stuff done. I'm feeling like I'm productive. My emails are getting done when I want to get them done, rather than when everybody else is contacting me. And I'm much more productive. So at the end of the day, they're like, wow, I ticked off all this stuff, and I got rid of most of my emails, which is great.
And that's I think a great insight. And can you maybe share some other tips there too, kind of in that same vein where, let's say number one, we have the boss that says, okay, no more emailing after hours, and you're not going to get punished if you're not checking your email after hours, kind of creating some of that culture. You mentioned, getting up, just taking a quick walk, every half hour or so for a few minutes. Any other things you think that can really boost productivity through, again, that brain health?
Yeah, there's lots of good ones. So another one is having decreasing your meetings by, rather than, a lot of organizations these days will have meetings, or meetings where they'll have someone come and present, or that one of the group members will present to the group, and then they'll have a little talk about what that presentation was all about. Rather than doing that, technology is really awesome these days, and I don't think we're using it optimally in any way, shape, or form. And I think we're using it really poorly. But one way to do that, rather than having a meeting where you have someone come and present, get the person to record their presentation and email it to everyone a couple of days before. Then people can choose when they're actually going to watch that presentation. And then when the meeting comes around, the meeting can be much briefer, because everyone's already watched the presentation. Everyone already has their questions. They could even email the person who did the presentation beforehand with a few questions, which they can answer. So it's all out there, and that can be group email. And so therefore you can keep meetings to a much shorter duration. Plus people can choose when they're watching the presentation. Plus we know that innovation and creativity and occurs when you're actually sleeping rather than during the day. So if you go into a meeting and someone hits you with this new presentation that you haven't thought about before and you haven't slept on, then you won't be anywhere near as innovative and creative in relation to what you're being told to think about. And so if you have the presentation a couple of days before, then you sleep on it a couple of nights, the ideas and everything come at night during REM sleep. And so you'll have a lot more ideas and a lot more great ways of tackling whatever problem is, or whatever the new idea is, or whatever the new culture, whatever it is that person's presenting on. So that's another way of actually allowing your staff to do the presentation when it's best for them, look at the presentation when it's best for them, to come up with great ideas because they're sleeping on it and been going through that REM sleep, which is really good for creativity. And then keeping your meetings to a short period of time so that people can actually be more productive and get more done, rather than be sitting in large meetings or those sorts of things. So that's another way to actually improve.
Yep. Yeah, that's I think another one too, that people just can't stand, having the meetings on top of meetings to talk about other meetings. And it's like, you just, it sucks away so much of our time. But one thing you did mention, just to kind of push back a little bit on this, because I could see, the good and the bad. You mentioned that so many of these creative ideas come to us, when we're not thinking about it, or even when we're sleeping. And so, I have 3 books under my belt, and one thing that I can attest to has been very helpful, but it could lend to some stress, is you're exactly right, where the middle of the night, or you're lying down, you're staring at the ceiling, and then it's like, aha, this perfect idea of how to wrap up the chapter, or just something that you got to fit in there that people are going to love. And so it's like, when you get those ideas, at least me, I'd grab my phone, and then I would go to the notes section, and I would just jot down that quote, or that thought that I had, so that it doesn't just slip my mind. So I think that's very good. But then for the person saying, I don't want to be wired all the time, should you resist that? Should you not do that and say, no, this is downtime. We're not going there. We're not opening up Pandora's box again. When do you turn it on or turn it off, I guess?
Yeah, I have a notepad beside my bed, and a lot of people I've talked to do the same thing. They'll have a notepad and a pen, go old school, beside their bed. And so, excuse me, whenever they wake up with a thought, they just write it in the notepad, and then they go back to sleep. And then in the morning, they check their notepad for all the good ideas they had during the night. Sometimes I don't even remember that I've written something down. But that's a good way to remove the technology, but still have the notes so that you can actually deal with them the next day. And we know that actually writing with a notepad rather than typing results in better memory retention for the information that you're trying to retain, and again results in better creativity and innovation if you're actually writing with notepad and pen. So that's a way to get around having the device in your room, because I think we should never have devices in our bedrooms. They should always be out of the bedroom, because of the fact that you've got the blue light and you've got the stress associated with the device. And we know that 10% of our attention, even when the devices are turned off, is on your device. So it actually affects your sleep as well, just because you're always attending to it, because that's work, right? Your phones these days, for most of us, especially entrepreneurs, is their phone. And so having it there beside you is sort of like having your work there beside you constantly when you're trying to sleep. So get rid of the phone and just have a notepad there, and just write a couple of notes, and you'll find you go straight back to sleep because you've written it down, and you'll actually then dream about it more. So you'll have more good ideas because of the writing it down.
What if you don't want to think about it anymore? What if you're like, I'm tired of work. I'm tired of writing this book. I just want to, hit the pillow and drift into Never Land. Does that exercise kind of perpetuate the thing that's plaguing you?
No, so it actually gets rid of it because you're actually writing it down. So which is really interesting. There's a lot of research now showing that when we type things, or when we put things into our devices, we tend to then think of it as something that not as permanent. So it's not actually something that you can that is permanently in the world. It's something that's out in this surreal world, and so we do tend to keep thinking about it. When we write things down on paper, we see it as being in the real world, so it's actually physical, so it's actually there, and so we're much more likely to go to sleep. So if you do have trouble going to sleep at night, one great thing to do is just get a notepad and just write down all your worries. And because you've written them down on a piece of paper, it's got to be on paper and in the real world, you see it as, okay, I've put it there and it's away. and it'll still be there in the morning. Whereas if you tend to write it down, on a computer, we see that as something which isn't real, and so therefore it's something that we continue to worry about in our brains. So yeah, writing down on paper on a notepad will actually help you sleep rather than affect your sleep. Whereas doing it on some sort of device won't get rid of that thought for later. Yeah.
Huh. I think you've converted me. I might go to the notepad.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And
That's good.
so, some questions I have, one of the things I wanted to ask you is, you talk about some of these strategies, and like, as I hear them, I'm like, that makes sense. I want to try that. You're a neuroscientist. Is when people say, oh, this made me sleep better, this made me feel happier, this removed this stress, a lot of the things that you're referring to, is it just based on polls that they polled 1,000 people to one do this, the other do that? Or are you actually, studying the brain and mapping the brain, seeing what's happening?
Yeah, no, so a lot of it, most of it's actually done by the neuroimaging. It's been really interesting because the last 25 years we've had neuroimaging, which has just basically been able to look at a human brain. And so prior to that, it was all behavioral. We were all just, we were trying to infer what was going on based on what was happening behaviorally, through surveys and through reaction times and things like this. The last 25 years has been a huge change in the way we see the way our brains work, because we've had MRIs and we've had EEG, which is two different ways of looking at human brains, and has meant that we can now put someone in a scanner and look at what happens when they're taking notes on a notepad rather than typing, or what happens when after they've batched emails rather than actually getting them randomly, and so on. So this, most of what I talk about is based on the neuroimaging, and that's actually shown us in a lot of cases that what we thought was actually wrong. So it's sort of turned around a lot of these ideas that we had, because before that, most of it was subjective, right? Most of it was based on us actually asking people, and most of us don't really know what's going on in our brain. Well, none of us know what's really going on in our brains. And so, yeah, using neuroimaging means that we can actually get to those the real things that are happening, and how we can actually improve those.
And that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. You said that a lot of times the neuroimaging was showing that you were wrong. Can you point out anything where, like, we thought, oh, the polls say do this, this is the way to proceed with your day or how to think or whatever, but the neuroimaging was conflicting and it said, no, that's actually not the right approach. Are there any that come to mind that you could share with us that it was kind of like enlightening like that?
Yeah, so the sleep stuff was really cool. So there's been a huge amount of research done on sleep, and looking at what actually happens during sleep. And of course, we used to think that sleep was just this way of resetting your brain. And so when you got up in the morning, it was, you got rid of all the bad neurotransmitters, and your brain had a rest. And so therefore you could keep going. But we actually now know, based on neuroimaging, that your brain during certain periods is actually more active during sleep than it is during the day. And so the sleep isn't actually, your brain's not actually resting during that time. It's actually doing a huge amount of work, and really important work, during sleep. And during certain stages, what you're actually doing is you're running through what you did during the day, and then going through different scenarios as to how you could have done it better. And so you're actually learning during those sleep periods, which is why sleep's really, really important for innovation and creativity, because you go through what you did, and then you go through different ways if you could have done that, which is why, when you were talking about writing the book, you would write in chapters and so on, and then you come to areas where you weren't really sure about it, or you weren't 100% on what you'd written, and then during the night your brain would be going through other ways of doing that, other ways of writing that. You're not aware of it, but it's happening in your long-term memory. And so that's why the next day you might get up and you might have find it much easier to write certain chapters or certain things, or a couple of days later or whatever. And so that's something that we now know a lot more about, and we understand sleep a lot better, and we understand how important sleep is. And getting those 6 to 8 hours is really, really crucial, and especially for teenagers and kids. So we now know that teenagers learn a lot about how to interact with people, and how to understand emotions and empathy and social, emotional intelligence and all these things. During sleep, they learn a lot of that stuff. And so sleep's really crucial for us as adults, but also, really, really crucial for teenagers and younger kids. So yeah, that's one of the really cool things that we found out from the neuroimaging.
In a question on that, I don't know if it's your exact domain, but this is something I've never understood. So me personally, I can go to sleep and I don't know if I don't dream or if I can just never remember a dream for the life of me. I could go months and months and months without being able to tell you, oh, I had this dream. My wife, on the other hand, she'll wake up every single morning and she'll literally detail 2, 3, maybe 4 dreams that she had. And she'll tell me like, oh, I couldn't sleep. I was just dreaming all night. It was just, I couldn't get any rest. I just kept dreaming and dreaming. It's the weirdest thing in the world to me. Is there a difference there? Like, have they ever done that in the neuroimaging of like, is there a difference between someone that knows their dreams and someone that's like, I just don't think I dream at all?
Yeah, so we all dream, unless there is a disorder, which means you don't dream. But everybody, unless you have that disorder, everybody dreams.
I hope
and
I don't.
You would know that if you had that disorder. So it's dreaming happens during our REM sleep, which is one of the 5 stages of sleep. And everyone does it. It's just some of us, we don't know why, but some people remember their dreams a lot more vividly than other people. I actually remember, as an aside, when I was at MIT, I had an undergraduate come and work with me, and he during high school actually got all the bits and pieces to make an EEG system, which he could put on his head to record his brainwaves while he was sleeping. And your brainwaves change when you go into REM sleep. And then he hooked that up to he had a whole bunch of things to hook it up to an alarm clock, so that when he went into REM sleep, the alarm clock would go off so that he would wake up, so that he would then remember his dreams, because the dreams were happening during that REM sleep. And he was really interested in his dreams, and he used to write notes. But also, Edison supposedly, and this is anecdotal and what I've read, but supposedly he also used to have a nice couch in his laboratory or in his office where he used to work. And whenever he didn't have good ideas, he used to sit in his couch and he'd grab a bunch of ball bearings and put them in his hand, and then he'd put a saucepan down beside the couch and he'd fall asleep. And when you go into REM sleep again, which is this dream state, which is actually when we come up with all these innovative ideas, because dreaming is actually going through to the different scenarios that I was talking about before. Your muscles relax when you go into that state so that you don't move. And so his muscles would relax. He'd let go of the ball bearings. They'd then fall into the saucepan, which would make a noise, which would wake him up. And that is supposedly when he came up with all his inventions, by doing that, by actually waking himself up. Because again, he said that he didn't remember his dreams, so he needed to wake himself up in the middle of his dreams so that he would remember what they were, so that he could actually come up with all these cool inventions.
That's such a cool idea. That's
Yeah.
interesting. And so I have so many questions here, but just for the sake of time, there's a couple big ones I want to hit on.
Sure.
I've dealt with some folks in my industry and others that are some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And it's funny, in conversation, I'll see, somebody we're with recommend a book. Oh, you got to check this book out, or you got to read this story. And then the very smart individual I know will say, thank you for the recommendation, but I just feel like there's no more room in my brain, that I'm just overwhelmed with just how much work I'm doing, how much information I'm taking in. Is that true, that it's almost like there's only so much memory up there, and if we want to take in a new concept or strategy, we kind of have to delete another one to make room for it? Or is there a way to keep kind of expanding, essentially our knowledge?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. We don't. So there's 2 memory systems. One's a working memory, which we've talked a bit about, which is the one that you're actually aware of, and it's your consciousness. And then you've got your long-term memory, which we don't have direct access to. So you're not aware of what's in there. And your long-term memory, as far as we're aware, and all the research suggests, there's no limit to it. So you can keep filling that up. We haven't found a limit to that yet. And so, no, there's no limit to how much you can get in there. The problem is having your working memory, because what has to happen is your working memory, which is what you're aware of, you have to hold information in that working memory for long enough that it sort of gets transferred to this temporary store, and then it gets transferred to your long-term memory. So it has to be held in there for long enough. And I think when people are saying, I've got too much in my memory, it's not really that they've got too much in their memory, it's that they've got too much going on in their working memory, and so they're always thinking about, you know, what they're doing and all the rest of it, that they can't hold things in there long enough to then get it into that temporary store to go into that long-term memory, which again is why you need to get rid of all distractions, because if you've got it in your working memory, and then you get distracted, that's why you lose the 90 seconds, right? Because you've got something in your working memory that hasn't yet been transferred to your temporary store, and you get distracted, you think about something else, you attend to something else, then you lose everything in your working memory, and it doesn't get transferred to that temporary store. But our long-term memory, as far as we're aware, as all the research, we haven't found a limit to it yet.
Huh, that's fascinating. Now, I think one of the things too, you talk about removing distractions. I'm sure that's certainly one step towards improving the situation, but I know there's lots of times where you can be in that perfect environment. You're in your recliner, nobody else is home. You know, you're relaxing, you're reading, and you find yourself staring at the same page for 15 minutes. Like, why do I keep trying to read this page, but I'm not reading it? I guess there's the physical distraction, but then there's also just our mind and being able to try and, you know, master and calm our mind.
Yeah, that is also a problem. And the best thing to do in that situation or scenario is to do something physical. So doing physical activity actually helps to reset your brain. So if you are having that point where you're not able to concentrate on a book, or you're not able to concentrate on your work or whatever, just standing up and, you know, doing whatever, a bunch of squats or star jumps or push-ups or whatever you're into, will actually help reset that and help you then concentrate better on what you're doing, or doing deep breathing, because deep breathing, we know, changes your heart rate and so on. And so, yeah, breathing in, holding, and then breathing out will actually help that as well.
Interesting. And so I want, maybe if we can fit in one last big pivot here, I'd love to get your take on it. Again, this is maybe not exactly what you do, but I think it's relevant. So one of the other buzzwords right now, or acronyms, is AI. Artificial intelligence is just, it seems, I talk a lot about this in my book. It seems like it's taking over. It's getting smarter than we realize it is. I know there's no brain to AI, but, you know, we have these computers essentially that can just problem solve 24/7, 365 at breakneck speed. Where maybe you seeing the applicability of that in medicine or in neuroscience? And is it a good thing, or is it a bad thing, or is it just like an unknown thing at this point?
Yeah, so I've been using what they call artificial intelligence. I mean, we don't actually have artificial intelligence yet. Intelligence requires you to be able to generate a new thought, and these programs that are around at the moment can't create new thoughts. They're just grabbing old thoughts or putting together old thoughts that are already on the internet. So it's not really artificial intelligence. It's based on support vector machines. And I started using those when I was at MIT, so 2005. I was one of the first to actually use it with neuroimaging data. So we were actually using these support vector machines, let's call them artificial intelligence algorithms, to determine what someone was thinking, or what someone was seeing based on their brain data, rather than based on what, you know, we were actually asking them. And so that's been amazing, and that's really given us a lot of answers in how our brains work and how our brains create, you know, this reality that we see, and how our brains, that a lot of the sleep stuff that I was talking about is based on using these algorithms to work out how the brain's doing what it's doing. So that's amazing. My wife is actually also a professor, and she does a lot of work in. She has done a lot of work in looking at mammograms, scans of women's breasts to look for cancers, and using both clinicians and using what we call artificial intelligence, and that's been amazing too. That's really improved some of the ability to diagnose things like cancers, but it's not as good as the real person for the more difficult ones. So the more abnormal ones. So they're really good at picking up the average, and they're really good at picking up the common things in things like scans and so on. But they're not good at picking up abnormalities, which is what the humans do better, and we all do better, which is really cool. Because there's still going to be a job for us in the future, and I don't think it'll ever get to the point where it's able to do that. But we do need to realize that what it's doing is it's just able to, because the computers are getting better, but they're not really getting more sophisticated. So what these things are able to do is they're able to pull a huge, much more data, much more quickly than they've ever been able to do, and then pull out the stuff that's relevant for whatever you want it to do. But it's not actually generating anything new. It is only regurgitating what's already out there.
Interesting. And so, Mark, I know your book coming out later this year. It's called The Connected Species. Maybe as a kind of a conclusion here, can you just share some of what that's about and what readers can expect if they want to get that book?
Yeah, thanks. It's based on a lot of the research, most of the research I've been doing over the last 25 years on us as humans being, this social species, and we are the most social species of any, and that's how we became the alpha, right? That's how we ended up where we are, on being able to live on any area in the world. And it's through collaboration, and it's through understanding, and it's through socialization that we've actually become the alpha species. It's not because we're the strongest or have the biggest brain or the fastest or anything like that. It's because we're social, because we actually interact with each other. And so over millions of years, well before we had language, because we've only had complex language for about 150,000 years, and most of us have only been able to read and write for the last 1 or 2 generations. So it's not because of that. It's because of our socialization. And for millions of years, our brains have developed to actually socialize and to work out who's friend and who's foe. And most of our brain, and we have a large brain to do that, because that's really, really complex. But at the moment, that's been driven in negative ways through things like social media, through the internet, through the fact that we're now able to do Zoom and all these things. We're not socializing anymore as much as we used to, and we need to do that, because that keeps our brain healthy, that keeps our brain strong, that staves off things like Alzheimer's disease and dementia and Parkinson's disease, all these neurodegenerative diseases. It also decreases the likelihood of you have mental health problems like anxiety and depression and suicidal tendencies and so on. It also can help in areas like ADHD and so on, in neurodevelopmental disorders as well. So we need to be spending more time with each other. We need to realize that we're all connected, right? The computer I use comes from all over the world, right? All the bits and pieces come from everywhere around the world, from all different societies. And we all need to appreciate that all the stuff we use is because of the fact that we're connected across the world. And so, yeah, we need to do that better, because at the moment, I think we're at a real crossroads, and we need to determine which way we want to go. And hopefully, we're going to choose to go down the route which is based on where we've come from, which is being connected and being social, and collaborating and doing more of that, so that our brains can continue to be healthy. Because our brains, for the first time in history, our brains are actually getting dumber on average. So every 5 years or so, they have to readjust the IQ tests, because in the past we've always got smarter. But for the last 10 years, we've actually got dumber. And so there's a real issue there, and we need to start thinking about how we're going to improve that.
Wow,
We have, every chapter has lots of tips. Every chapter has a nice little summary at the end and has all the research associated with what I'm talking about. So there's lots of information in there, and there's lots of tips that you can actually instigate into your own life or your own organization at the end of each chapter based on what I talk about.
That's really cool. I mean, I have so many questions around the subject, and I guess that's why you wrote a book, and we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Mark, thank you so much for making time. I know over here it's nighttime. Over where you're at, it's the crack of dawn. So I'm glad we were able to team up and have this interview.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks for having me along.
My pleasure. Well, everyone, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Caderna podcast. I'm Brian Caderna, and we just had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Mark Williams. Be sure to check out his new book later this year, The Connected Species, and we will see you next time.
This podcast is intended for the general public and for informational purposes only. The show does not provide any recommendations or investment advice regarding any specific account type, service, strategy, or product, or to otherwise act in any fiduciary or other capacity. Please contact a financial professional for guidance and information that is specific to your situation. Brian Caderna does not provide tax or legal advice. Please contact your accountant or legal advisor to discuss your situation. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Caderna Financial Team, and opinions stated are their own. All investments contain risk and may lose value. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. References to specific securities, asset classes, and financial markets are for illustrative purposes only and do not constitute a solicitation, offer, or recommendation to purchase or sell a security. Brian Caderna is a registered representative and financial advisor of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. OSJ 300 Broadacres Drive, Suite 175, Bloomfield, New Jersey 07003. Phone number 973-244-4420. Securities products and advisory services offered through PAS, member FINRA SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. PAS is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Caderna Financial Team is not an affiliate or subsidiary of PAS or Guardian. California Insurance License Number 0K04194.